The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will please come to order. Today we are having a hearing on reproductive care in America following the Supreme Court's devastating decision in Dobbs to overturn Roe v. Wade. I will have an opening statement followed by Senator Marshall. We will then introduce our witnesses, and after the witnesses give their testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. And while we are unable to have the hearing fully open to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website at help.senate.gov, and the live stream will include closed captioning. If you are in need of other accommodations, please reach out to the committee or to the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. 3 weeks ago, the Supreme Court and the Republicans who dedicated years to swinging the court aggressively to the right dragged our country back 50 years. They overturned Roe v. Wade, ended the right to abortion, and upended the lives of millions of people. And the consequences have been harsh and swift. Women sobbed in clinics as they had their abortions canceled, their personal health care decisions overruled, their futures thrown in jeopardy, and their control over their own bodies taken away. It was heartbreaking, terrifying, enraging, and barbaric. And that was just day one. Since then, the devastating repercussions of Republicans' cruelty continue to crash around us. Women unable to get abortions for any reason. Healthcare providers unable to do their jobs without risking prison. Patients with lupus, cancer, arthritis, and more denied the medications that they need. Complete uncertainty for people planning their futures as access to Plan B and IVF have been thrown into jeopardy. And Republicans' response to this devastation is to discuss how they can push even further, be even harsher, take even more power away from patients, and scare even more doctors out of their jobs. Some Republicans are talking about a federal ban on abortion, overruling laws in states like my home state of Washington, and ripping away rights from my constituents. Republicans are talking about criminal penalties for women and healthcare providers, and about making traveling to get an abortion illegal. They are talking about everything except the actual harm they're causing. This is a healthcare crisis that was entirely avoidable, and is entirely their own creation. I have been warning for years about Republicans' attacks on reproductive rights putting lives at risk, and I'm far from the only one. Women, providers, and patients across the country have all been shouting from the rooftops that overturning Roe would be devastating. But Republicans refuse to listen to me or to the majority of people across the country who wanted Roe to stand, who wanted to keep their rights and preserve women's ability to control their own bodies. And Republicans are still continuing to spread disinformation about the reality that we're now facing and about the consequences of this backwards agenda. When the leaked decision came out, Republicans tried to say they weren't going to put women and doctors in jail, even as state legislatures across the country were already moving to do just that. And they are still trying to say it won't be that bad, even when it is clearly devastating for women across the country who they are ignoring and oppressing. Well, today we are going to hear exactly what this cruelty means for women seeking abortions, women Republicans will force to stay pregnant when they do not want to be, women whose bodies Republicans are taking control of without their consent and against their wishes. And this isn't just about whether people want to be parents, though let me be perfectly clear, we must do way more than Republicans have ever dreamed of doing to actually support parents. Childcare, paid leave, you name it. Republicans have blocked Democrats' nonstop efforts to deliver for working families. But anyone who has given birth also knows this isn't just about whether you are ready to raise a child. Pregnancy is a life-changing medical procedure. It takes a physical toll. It takes a mental toll. And for too many women in our country, it takes their life. No one should be forced to go through this against their will. But Republicans are going to force women to stay pregnant, not only when they don't want to be, but even when it could kill them. Just ask Elizabeth, who I spoke with last week in Spokane. She has been pregnant 4 times, all planned, all wanted. But twice she learned her pregnancy would be fatal if it was not ended. In the first instance, she got the heartbreaking news that one of the twins that she was carrying had died. The other could not possibly survive outside the womb, and that her life was now in grave danger. In the second instance, she was told that without immediate action, she would lose too much blood to survive the night. And as she told me, and I quote, "Had I lived in a state without access to safe and legal abortion, I would have died, bleeding out on the side of the road, trying to make it to a state that would help me." Those are the stakes. And not just for Elizabeth, but for many patients. About 1 in 50 pregnancies in our country are ectopic. That means they're not viable, and without medical action, they are deadly. But in Republicans' post-Roe world, healthcare providers aren't sure when or even if they will be able to treat ectopic patients without being sent to prison. Some have already been instructed to observe patients until they have unstable vital signs before acting. Basically, sit on your hands until women are at dire risk before you can do what is medically necessary. That is absolutely barbaric, and it's a policy choice that Republicans have made. Now, some may try to suggest that patients go to another state, but if you're in the middle of a medical emergency that's dangerous or impossible. Not to mention that some Republicans are already talking about banning interstate travel. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that the same patients and providers that are hurt by these restrictions are on the front lines of our nation's maternal mortality crisis. We have the worst maternal death rate in the developed world. And in the very states where it is the most dangerous to give birth, Republican legislators are now forcing people to give birth against their will. It doesn't take an expert to understand this is only going to get worse because of the dangerous abortion bans. Women will be denied the care they need, the care their doctors know could save their lives. States will lose maternal health care providers who understandably don't want to live where they could be jailed for doing their job. This will be especially hard on people in rural areas, on women of color, and on women with disabilities who already have a particularly difficult time finding a provider who takes their concerns seriously and understands their health care needs. And it can be even harder still for transgender patients seeking reproductive care while facing stigma, discrimination, and bigotry. And make no mistake, this isn't just going to devastate patients in states with abortion bans. First off, I want to be very clear. Republicans have been explicit. They want to go further. They want to pass legislation to go after people who help patients travel for an abortion, and a national abortion ban that would trample the rights of patients in Washington state. And secondly, even now, health clinics are being overwhelmed. I was in Spokane last week, only miles from the Idaho border, and providers there are already seeing an uptick of patients and preparing for a huge surge of patients seeking care when Idaho's extreme ban goes into effect next door. We are talking as many as 5 times more people seeking abortions at our clinics. They are on the front lines of a full-blown healthcare crisis. And let's not forget there are so many women who cannot travel to get an abortion, who don't have the time or the resources, who face barriers to accessible travel, or are too young to drive themselves. There's also the very real risk that people with no other options will turn to dangerous, even deadly, misinformation that is spreading on social media. Because, as I have warned before so many times, banning abortion doesn't stop abortions. It just stops people from getting safe abortions. And it is not only women seeking abortions who are having their lives totally upended by Republicans. It's women seeking birth control. Some Republicans have discussed going after contraception next, and Justice Thomas said the Supreme Court should overturn the right to birth control. People hoping to start a family using IVF could also be under threat. IVF providers have serious concerns about whether parents and providers could be punished if an embryo doesn't survive being thawed for implementation or for disposing unused embryos. That isn't idle worrying, because Republicans in several states have already proposed extreme bills that ban abortions starting at conception and could impact IVF and some methods of birth control. And already, pharmacies have told patients with lupus, arthritis, and other conditions they can't fill their prescriptions due to concerns the drugs would be used for an abortion. And let's be clear, those drugs the FDA approved as safe and effective for their condition years ago. There are also cancer patients who may be unable to start chemotherapy until they can get an abortion. And then there are people who have a miscarriage. Abortion bans could jeopardize their health and stop them from getting the care they need to end their miscarriage. And afterwards, they could still face another nightmare, being reported by someone who thinks they got an abortion. Imagine going through the heartbreak of losing your pregnancy and then being put in prison for it. And this doesn't have to be an exercise in imagination. From 2006 to 2020, over 1,000 women in this country were investigated, detained, or arrested because of their pregnancy outcomes. That is horrific. If it's a problem we should be trying to solve, and instead, thanks to Republicans, it's about to get dramatically worse. That's why people across the country are so scared and so heartbroken and so angry, and I am too, because the stakes could not possibly be higher. That's why I led Senate Democrats in pushing President Biden and his administration to do everything they can to protect access to abortion and reproductive health care. And President Biden's executive order on abortion last week was a good, important step, but this fight is far from over. As we continue living through a post-Roe healthcare crisis, I am still urging the President to continue to fight back. But with limited executive authority, ultimately, we need more pro-choice senators in the Senate willing to waive the filibuster so we can protect women. If we can get that, we can codify Roe as well as put in law key protections for women. It is as simple as that. We also need to hold Republicans accountable for the harsh reality they have now created. And that is why I'm holding this hearing today. It's why later this week we will call for unanimous consent to pass a bill to protect women who travel to another state for abortion care, to show the stark contrast between Republicans' cruel agenda and Democrats' steadfast commitment to making sure women can get the reproductive health care they need. And it's why I'm going to continue standing with women and lifting up patients' voices. Anyone who thinks I'm going to stop, any Republican who thinks people will forget about this in a few months, you still don't get it. How do you forget being denied your prescription because of this, or being denied your birth control? How do you forget having to drive across states to end a pregnancy so you can fight for your life against cancer? How do you forget being forced to choose between saving your patient or going to jail? How do you forget your dream of starting a family through IVF becoming a legal nightmare? How do you ever in your life forget being investigated for your miscarriage or driving your 10-year-old daughter across state lines after she was raped and could not get an abortion otherwise? And how little do you have to care about women to think anyone will forget the people who are killed by this? Women who can't get an abortion but need one, who turn to unsafe information because they were denied access to safe medical care. People who couldn't get a prescription filled, couldn't start chemo, or died in a maternal health care desert since doctors don't want to be treated like criminals for doing their job. People will not forget those losses. They will sit across from that empty chair every day, and they will sleep next to that empty space every night. Mark my words, they will not forget. And Democrats are not going to let Republicans ignore them either. We will not let them whistle past the graveyard they have been spent so long digging. And we will absolutely not stop fighting with everything we've got to end this chaos, save lives, and codify the right to abortion into law. We will never stop fighting for women's rights to control their own bodies. Never.